what is the key issue that enterprises are still facing and what are they overlooking?
How do we continue to advance these programs to match what the bad guys are up to and at the same time be operationally efficient? We don't want to spend money on tools we don't need.
When did you realize that configuration drift was actually the real issue when it came to defenses?
But whenever I speak to somebody about something they vibe coded in security, could be something simple like doing SOC 2 compliance checks across technical controls. Consistently, it worked for 2 or 3 months. And then I came back to it and it wasn't working as expected. I didn't even know until I dug into it.
Welcome back to the Security Strategist podcast, your roadmap for evolving cybersecurity. I am Shubhangi Dua, podcast producer, B2B tech journalist, and your host this episode. Enterprises are spending more on cybersecurity than ever before. More tools, more teams, more budget, especially with the explosion of AI, as already predicted. And yet, 97% of them suffered a breach or near miss last year. Not because the attackers found any vulnerability, but because of a flaw in tools that they already owned. Today, we're getting into the problem nobody's been talking about: configuration drift. And I am joined by Garrett Hamilton, CEO of Reach Security, and Jay Wilson, CIO and CISO at Insurity. Welcome to both of you. It's so great to have you on.
Good. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Before I get started, I would like to set the agenda for this episode. So what is the one thing that you'd want to tell our audience so they stay tuned in?
I think it's a pretty well-known fact now that offense is running on AI. And that is creating an opportunity, not just in the collapsing of skill gaps of attackers that can get into an organization, but it's also scaling the adversary in a way that allows them to find a weakness or misconfiguration or vulnerability of any type across almost any business now. And you're seeing that play out with some of the recent global events, as well as a recent attack on a company where the weakness was not a vulnerability being exploited, but it was a series of controls around administrators that were less strong than they should be, giving access to a big red button that allowed the deletion of hundreds of thousands of data on hundreds of thousands of devices. And so offense is running on AI, defense needs to as well. And AI is permeating itself deeper into many of the areas of security, offensive security, AI for SOC. And it also needs to make its way into how defenders leverage it to make sure security controls are in place, protecting that organization at the scale of the attack surface these folks are protecting. So I'd say that is certainly something that we all know, and we'll be talking more about what that looks like today. And that's, to me, the most existential crisis we're facing as defenders. And so hope people will tune in on that.
What I would say is to my fellow practitioners, I feel you. This is probably one of the most interesting, intellectually stimulating, and stressful times as a practitioner that I've been through. The advent of AI from an offensive perspective and a defensive perspective, and just an operational perspective across all of the organizations that we support, has really changed our role and the dynamic that we have to face. Right? How do we balance risk? I think it was previously a different world, and in the past year or two, it's really shifted, and it's put a lot of pressure on security practitioners.
With so many organizations now tapping into this technology, and yet 97% of companies still experienced a breach or a close call last year from tools that they already owned. So what is the key issue that enterprises are still facing and what are they overlooking?
Well, Jay, I think, you and I have had a chance to build a relationship and over the past year and some change, and you've given a lot of great perspective on this. One of the graphs you drew on a whiteboard for me was this increase in attack surface and number of controls and capabilities that are available, but in an exponential graph, or the linear nature of the growth of a security team or the growth of an IT and security team. Maybe you can talk a little about that, because I think that's a great visual, but also coming from the practitioner side, probably part of the crux of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, the surface area of the problem that us as practitioners is solving is just continuing to increase. Security budgets, I don't know if they're increasing in the same trajectory on that graph, right? It depends on the organization. It depends on the posture, but that's the challenge. How do we continue to advance these programs to match what the bad guys are up to, and at the same time, be operationally efficient. We don't want to spend money on tools we don't need. We don't want to buy tools and not use them, right? And so those are some of the problems that we face.
Yeah, and I think what my observation has been, we brought up a few of the AI projects. Claude is clearly in vogue and drawing a lot of attention. Um, but we also have to think about where the adversary is leveraging AI and where we want to put our focus. And so, as both builders and as practitioners, and so my observation has been, having built product. I was at Palo Alto Networks before building Reach. I was there for a long, long time. I was fortunate enough to have a product used by tens of thousands of companies around the world. And even 5, 6 years ago, and even with, call it, a single platform being the network devices being supported, there was always called into question: do we have the money to spend on the right skill sets to appropriately operate these products at scale and use them at scale? And in almost all cases, besides quite large financials, uh, hiring security product experts to manage everything at scale and work across functionally with IT uh, was not in the cards, not in the financial cards. And so you had one product expert really being five, and or six product experts in one, and it really never quite scaled even at that time. So I think the proliferation of the attack surface and the controls available now have really caused, I mean, have caused this more than ever to be disjointed from an investment as well as an outcome basis.
If you had to talk about security operations in an enterprise, when did you realize that configuration drift was actually the real issue when it came to defenses?
It's one of many, so I don't want to make it sound like it's the only issue. In every organization, you have to balance the risk profile that you have across different areas of your program. But what I would say is that configuration drift historically has been an overlooked area of risk, and this goes back many years, right? You would go into an organization, whether you're on the IT side or the security side, and you would ask questions like, "Well, how often are we like reviewing the rules in our firewall?" And you know, when we have to might be the answer, or something like that, ad hoc, right? You would say, and that was never really a good answer. And you would start to put in place like a policy review on a regular basis. But the answer was always more, I would say, on the compliance or the check the boxy side of this, as opposed to the I want the best possible security for my organization every moment of the day, because things have shifted this week, that we have this type of attack happening. How do we update our configuration to match the external conflict that we're facing, as well as the business context that's always shifting at the same time? So when you put those kinds of things together and you expand it upon all of your different configuration, source points, not just firewalls. That's just an example. It could be any of these kind of configurations that you run across your security platform. You have almost like an exponential problem to solve with a not exponential team, as we talked about. So I think configuration drift has been a problem for years, 5, 10 years, maybe longer. We just haven't focused on it. And and keep in mind, security kind of got born out of IT. So that's probably why we are where we are today, right? Um, when you looked at those problems historically as oh, it's an IT thing, I'm going to set it up, I'm going to turn it on, and I'm not going to touch it if it's not broken, right? That like I've been in IT a long time. Yeah, exactly. Don't touch it. It's working. Let's leave it running, right? It's which was a really like 20 years ago or 25 years ago. That was a very valid statement. Not so much a valid statement today on either IT or security. So we have to evolve. We have to move forward and create a more comprehensive approach to it.
Yeah, and I would say that two points already brought up to connect. So I opened by describing this change in scale for the adversary and their ability to leverage AI on the offense. And you may have gotten by in the past by having a change to multi-factor authentication to a group you didn't know about and you got to catch it 3 months later. Or you may have made an exclusion in an EDR product for the executives with C colon backslash, just the entire drive, right? Like you just completely exclude the entire drive. And it might have been okay for 6 or 9 months. In both of those instances, I use those timeframes because I actually was with customers in the trenches thousands of times with these types of cases where a misconfiguration, something wasn't turned on, something had been set up and it had been turned off. There's all these classical examples, and that's what drove us to start Reach. But now more than ever, the adversary can find it faster than that 3 month or 6 month dwell time window that you've had that drift change, that misconfiguration. And I think to Jay's point, tying in this most recent point about networking side, coming from a company that coined and built the next generation firewall, and you would see this all the time. It first started as like, we'll get to it, as Jay alluded to. We'll get to the reviewing their network rules. Then it became, well, we'll buy a tool that at least connects to our change control process. It allows us to audit whether or not the change went through the change control process. But in all those cases, it wasn't a contextual security posture conversation being had. It was did a change happen or not? Did we know about it? Does the person in the change control board, or does the person reviewing the change ad hoc in a Jira ticket or a ServiceNow ticket, do they have the context of what the change would do and how it would impact the security posture of the organization? And it's just a question to ask. And in many cases, the security engineers 1 and the network engineers are 20 in volume, right? You have them all around the world and they're making changes all the time. So how could that possibly scale? So those two observations, I think now more than ever are what are uh, impacting really the implications of drift in an organization. But as Jay alluded to, this problem's existed for a long time. But as we've opened up the conversation, the ability to find exploitable weaknesses and vulnerabilities is faster than ever by the adversary. And so it's now almost every problem that Jay probably has on his plate is accelerated, right? To have to think through and how to address in a scalable way that's going to be long lasting. It doesn't require a network security engineer to have to review without something providing it context, right? Information on what this change might do and the implications on security posture. Like those things become really important and almost expected, right? And individual vendors can try to take that approach, but context from the business sense is driven by multiple data points across multiple locations. So you take drift, but drift in the context of the business, which is an important element that hasn't been previously available in the market.
Yeah. I also think in the last 10 years, you've seen an explosion of security vendors offering visibility, right? And there's a lot of visibility play. There still is a huge need for visibility. And you see that in, kind of the tremendous growth of, say, the CNAPP space as an example. But where I find it very interesting, there hasn't been as much focus, which you focused on, Garrett, is what about the stuff that's like a little closer to the vest? Like this is security infrastructure. There hasn't been a lot of focus on the visibility of change to security infrastructure because there's sort of this assumption that, well, I should know what my team is doing or I should know what that other team is doing. It's closer to to the center or the core of your operation as a CISO or a CIO, which is true. But as your organization grows and as you expand and speed up and use AI even to make some of these changes, you need more visibility in that inner core of what you're doing, right? And it's critical.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Drift is conceptually something that happens everywhere, right? It's not sometimes when I speak to people about it that are not in security, I'll reference things that are, really annoying. You get your iOS update and the update changes how you get access to something or even what the app looks like. in a way, that's Drifter effectively changes. That's a change in the way you do something. Some platform providers change their UI every 6 months. You can probably think of the ones I'm talking about. Those are, almost tangible physical changes to the way you operate something. But those are in your face. Security tool or security configurations or security control configurations, when they drift, it can oftentimes be silent. And there's a ton more information you need that's not in your face that you have to go to other places to get access to. And so, at Reach, we focus on how security controls drift, but there's other things that Jay has to worry about from a drift standpoint that are on his radar. Um, all of this talk, which is, it's incredibly valuable for somebody like me to be able to code something, which is really just Claude helping me build build some basic stuff. And some people are incredible at it, like our engineers, right? They leverage Claude at scale and other AI tools. I'm sure Jay has many stories there. But whenever I speak to somebody about something they vibe coded in security, could be something simple like doing SOC 2 compliance checks across technical controls. Consistently, it worked for 2 or 3 months, and then I came back to it and it wasn't working as expected. I didn't even know until I dug into it. And so you have this world where you still have to maintain whatever it is you're using, and you're going to have drift in the tools you vibe code. You're going to have drift in the tools you use from an AI standpoint. And our focus here is around security controls, but it's a systemic thing, whether it's in your face or sitting in the background that pops up when you get the wrong result to the auditor. It'll inevitably happen. So
So, Jay, you spoke about how the CISOs are not getting the complete picture technically, and they're leveraging AI to do that now. This is where Reach comes in, I assume. So, what is Reach doing differently than other organizations?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot around focusing on your security controls. As I said, that historically we haven't worried about drift or call it configuration efficacy necessarily in your security controls because you're directly controlling those. Maybe your organization is, a part of that is handed to your IT teams, or part of it is handed to your operational teams. Like, really depends on that. The value with Reach is that regardless of what the organizational setup is, I can see those changes, and I can also make recommendations to the practitioners that are running those tools, and say, hey, have you thought about making this change? It looks like it could reduce our risk, right? So it's really, it goes back to kind of a defense in depth strategy for a CISO, which is, how do I make sure that at every storm door that I have available to myself, that I'm really securing that door as best I can? Because no matter what layer we're talking about in your defensive depth strategy, you want to make sure your controls are best, right? A lot of people just focus on that outer door, and you know, to my defense, I do a lot of that too because I don't want anybody to get into that door. But and I think any good CISO would feel the same. But focusing on some of those inner doors too, is great because usually it's not a question of if the bad guys get in. It's a question of what happens when they do. And through my many years as a CISO and a practitioner, I've definitely seen that defense in depth strategy come to bear positive results where somebody maybe gets in the first layer, but they're stopped in the next layer. Or maybe they even get in a couple and they're stopped in that next layer because you have good control configuration down below, right?
So, just for context, 72% of security budgets still go into detection and response instead of prevention. So, perhaps, Garrett, what is the one business case for switching that ratio?
I have been, and Jay have been in this long enough to know that the pendulum swings between proactive and preventative and detection and response. It swings every 7 to 8 years, and we spent a lot of time in the world of detection response, uh, detection engineering, and those are all important things, which allude to the stat that you're hitting on. But if you looked at historical data points, I'm sure you would find maybe 7, 8 years ago that a lot of money was being spent on the NGAV space, which has now manifests itself as EDR, the NGFW market, and prevention works, not detection. I was part of that wave at Palo Alto Networks. And so I think if you look back, you'd see this trend. Now, what you hope is that because this pendulum swings and eventually becomes, center on 50-50 or somewhere around that number. What I would say is proactive or preemptive or preventative, depending on which analyst you speak to and which element you subscribe to. They mean all slightly different things, but all kind of the same, is becoming the prominent conversation that we're having with customers. And the reason for that is they've made a lot of investment in how to pay down mean time to respond, how to respond quicker. They've maybe outsourced their response to one of the major providers. But inevitably, if you don't focus on the preventative side of the house, you have a lot of exhaust being blown into the detection and response side that has to be handled. And so I would say that most of the conversations I'm having in an unbiased nature are about being proactive, being preemptive, being preventative. And again, that pendulum swinging back is a way to do so. And I think in doing so, technology is enabling that. It's not just a conversation of like, oh, we spent too much here, now we're going to move it over here. It's actually technology is making it possible to focus on the outcome and scale that outcome around. We can be proactive in how we protect this organization. We can find things before the bad guy does. We can detect a configuration change within minutes of it happening that would pose a risk and rewind or find a way to revert. And there's two reasons I think that's becoming possible. One, I hit on the technology, but two, folks like Jay, whether CIO, CISO, very technical folks from a security standpoint operating both sides, are also becoming more common. So the messy middle between the security outcomes that want to be driven and where those security controls live, for example, living in an IT-based tool collaboration app, the communication boundaries are becoming smaller between them and less mucky and less political. So I'd say those two trends are what's helping the pendulum swing back. Now, again, my hope as a security vendor is that there'll be a balance struck between the two. But that's what I'm seeing. That's inevitably biased, but hopefully not too biased in terms of based on the conversations I'm having. But that's what's bringing something like drift detection into focus, is not just all the elements from the outside, but the interest in being proactive, being preventative, improving that side of the house to actually make detection and response more effective and more targeted and more well-resourced.
One thing I would add too, when you look at those stats, I feel like the data can be a little misleading, because many times detect and response, which is critical to every business, everybody needs it. It includes a services component, and you're paying for services, people effectively, that your staff doesn't maybe have. Not every organization does that, but many do. And so I think that it's like comparing apples to oranges in some sense, because you're saying, well, that 72% includes XYZ number of people that are supporting this operational need versus a tool, which is helping my team solve a problem, right? So they're strange, and I think you could look at the stats in any way you want, but the reality is you need both.
Yeah, Jay, it's actually an interesting point. Talk about how you staff your team, but in most organizations I talk to, most companies, there are a lot more analysts than there are, say, security engineers doing integration or architects ensuring what they've established as the standard is in fact implemented. That was one of the big drivers for Reach is serving that side of the house, serving those folks, serving security engineering teams, serving security architects, folks that are inevitably responsible for attesting to or providing assurance that what's in place is working as expected. And we're seeing assurance in the title of several senior positions, especially in financials. And much of their objective is just this, but they're not getting 20 analysts to pay down alerts, right? to do that. They're working with the team they have. And that's actually a great point. You have to collapse the skill requirement, I guess, to be on a more proactive side. There's no way around it, right? And skill is not just mean like the skill set of an individual, the overall volume of that skill set that you can recruit and maintain inside of your business and pay for.
We talked about vibe coding, and I want to talk about how vibe coding can be balanced with what a security organization has to offer so that enterprises don't just start building their own tools because they'll always need an external security measure.
Yeah, so I view those as JF. I'll go first. I mean, you definitely have way more, I'll call expertise or on the output, the value and output of at scale of vibe coding, or really just AI assistance in coding. So, but I hear two questions, so I want to bifurcate them. I hear one around autonomous remediation, and that has its own requirements, and then the idea of vibe coding everything. Um, it is a very common and a very common thing, particularly in the Bay Area and other high tech areas where engineering teams become security teams and they believe they can build all of the security tools that you might need. What I have seen nearly 100% of the time is those smart people that build those programs and build those technologies, even before vibe coding was the thing, by the way. Uh, what I have seen is that those smart people move to the next business, to the next company, to the next place. And when they do, in its wake is left a bunch of tools that no one can support and no one really knows how they're working. And if you drive up and down the 101 in Silicon Valley, you'll find a number of companies where that's happened. And so the whole reason for the build versus buy still exists. Is it easier to build a one-off tool on your own data? Is it easier to? We have a customer, a public reference of ours, and their team is really strong. They're not building to replace Reach or a CNET product, but they had a specific question they wanted to answer, and they had the data to go and do it. So they vibe coded something to answer that question for them and provide that and do that at scale for them. So those are the cases where build versus buy becomes more interesting. And it's, do I build this thing really quick for this one problem I have and I just need to answer it now? Or do I buy something for an existential or a long lasting problem that I need to solve? That's at least kind of how I think about the decision framework I'm seeing with folks. And I, quite frankly, am in full support of people trying to vibe code different things. We have large Fortune 500s that met Reach and tried to build it a year and a half ago, and now their customers are going through proof of values because they realize this is really hard and work I didn't want to do, and my team wasn't happy doing. Like pulling next generation firewall configs on premises and figuring out how to enumerate them and make them sane is really cruddy work and not fun. And so people don't want to work on that, but vendors do. It's the lifeblood of what we do. So I'd say on that piece, the second element, I know we're coming up on time, the second element around autonomous remediation, I think Jay and I share similar views there. And so I'd actually just prefer to throw that question to him and let him answer and have the final word.
Yeah, look, first on vibe coding, there's so many possibilities of how you can use it. And again, I think the hype and the kind of the news articles we read on like Wall Street and stuff are talking about how, okay, vibe coding is going to replace all these SaaS software companies. I don't agree for all the reasons Garrett said, but that doesn't mean that every company and every operation shouldn't be leveraging it. There's so many, we'll say, processes or things that sit in between those SaaS solutions that we use as operators and our businesses. And those are those opportunities to automate or to solve problems. And, historically, when you look at enterprise software sales, and the reason you would call it enterprise software is because there'd be a lot of customization or configuration of that software. And I think vibe coding potentially gives us an opportunity to close that gap in a different way. It still doesn't solve the fundamental issue though. And Garrett alluded to it, which is that any software, whether I have Claude write it or I write it myself, requires maintenance. And every problem that it's solving has operational construct on each side that changes from time to time. whether that's an API that changes or interpreting the data in different ways over time because the context changes. It requires maintenance, and so it's I would say vibe coding is creating new problems or maybe new old problems. I was having this conversation with somebody recently where I said, well, vibe coding has shortened the development life cycle dramatically. And now we need to focus on how we test things and how we do life cycle maintenance on them in a more rigorous manner. And it reminds me of my early days as a software developer, right? I learned C, and when you were writing C code, you had to know where the memory was. You had to read the manual. You had to kind of follow a process, and you had to make sure the code that you're writing would actually integrate with the code that the guy sitting next to you or the gal sitting next to you was writing too. Because if you guys weren't on the same page and it got time to do integration, nothing would happen good, right? So now we're kind of getting back to that old problem with a new tool set, which is that we have to care about the design of what we're doing even more so because in the last 15 years, a lot of software development has sort of been fluid design. We'll figure it out along the way. We'll design the architecture as we go. We'll solve the testing problems as we go. Uh, Not anymore because the as you go part, it's like days, right? Instead of weeks or months. So it is definitely changing the way we look at things. And no matter whether you have a non-technical person vibe coding or a technical person vibe coding, it doesn't solve that problem. You still need to think about how do I maintain it? How do I make sure it continues to operate? Now, onto the automated remediation. I definitely have some thoughts on this. I think there's huge opportunity to imbue automated remediation throughout systems. The trick is the operations of companies are not necessarily like ready for that. And it depends on what part of the operation. It depends on the company. It depends on what they do. There's so many factors that go into that. It's not like linear. For example, I would not put automated remediation in my production environment. That would be, not good. What if it broke something? I'd want to test it. So how you instrument that in your environment in such a manner that it can actually save time and solve a problem is the trick. And it always comes down to how you connect those technical components with the business context and how do we create actual business value. I think there's some interesting firms out there that are trying to solve it at a software level, and I think that's pretty compelling to me because as we get into a vibe coding world, the idea of having another AI agent remediate issues in code doesn't seem so scary as maybe 5 years ago we were having the same conversation and I would suggest something to someone like, hey, why don't we just have this software, fix the code so that there's not a security vulnerability in it. And, I'd have a development team look at me like, you've got to be crazy. We could never let it do that. But now me saying it out loud somehow sounds more sane because it is more sane. We have AI to help us validate that process and make it potentially more real and less, we'll call it less blast area radius problems when you get into that. Just like Garrett said about the trail of developers who leave problems at some of the startups that they work at. I think automated remediation could do the same thing if it's not implemented correctly. So it's all about how you do it.
Yeah, I would, my view as a vendor is, um, analysts love to pump automated remediation. Investors love to pump automated remediation. Operators want you to be maniacally focused on understanding how they do things, and then provide them the appropriate options of automation. And, unfortunately, that's the world we live in where there's a misalignment between analysts, investors, and, and the operators. But the most important one is that latter one, right? At the end of the day, those are the folks that are going to help you build something great that you get to partner with. So, yes, automation, great, but automation can be a ton of things. And that maybe that's the intelligent part of automation that we were talking about.
Yep, agreed. It's harder than it sounds on the surface, is the answer, and but it's worth doing, and it's worth it investing in.
That's amazing. Thank you so much both for joining us today. What I took away from this episode is that while configuration drift has historically been an overlooked, silent, and systemic issue, the speed and scale of offensive AI now means that adversaries can find these misconfigurations faster than ever. So, this also makes proactive prevention and continuous assurance of security controls essential. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in today. We hope you took a lot away from today's conversation. For further information on what we've talked about, please head over to reach.security. Also, download their new research report on configuration drift. We'll be back next week with another episode in our podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all major platforms and follow the conversation on our socials at EN360 Tech on X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, please head over to en360tech.com. Thank you so much.